By the time I was 10 years old, I had begun to hang around the plumbing and heating department at the local Montgomery Ward store, where my dad was the department manager. He realized I was getting old enough to actually be of some help to him and not just a nuisance. I was a child with boundless energy, and I guess my dad wanted to harness some of it. Additionally, I've been told that I was even more talkative back then than I am today, though I find that hard to believe. The Montgomery Ward store where my dad worked for decades was an aging 3-story building in the original part of my hometown's 4-block Main Street shopping area, built in the 1800s. There was a difference in the level of the land between Main Street and the parallel street to the south, which was, not surprisingly, called South Street. The store not only owned the big 3-story building that faced Main Street, it owned an equally old building that ran from Main to South Street on First Street. If you're not familiar with Washington, Indiana, I know this may be a little hard for you to picture. But essentially, Ward's owned an L-shaped property. In the back of the store was a huge parking lot. It was on a slant. Remember I told you South Street was down the hill from Main. Adjacent to the parking lot was a separate building that housed the Montgomery Ward Tire Shop. At one time, when Ward's was still in business and was a huge national store chain, its tire and auto shops were big money makers. Also off the parking lot was the entrance to the warehouse, which had a loading dock and long slanted ramp that ran down to the parking lot. Every afternoon, just after I got out of school, a huge semi-trailer truck would pull into the parking lot, change directions, and back up into the loading dock. The driver's name was John Riddle. I used to rush to the store after school and wait for him and that huge truck to arrive. To this day, I can't figure out how he managed to swing that big rig around and then throw it into reverse with such precision. I once had a dream as a child that it was I who was driving the truck. I backed it through one of the store's picture windows. But John Riddle's expertise in manhandling that big rig was even more apparent at the Ward store in the next big city over. To get to its loading dock, Riddle had to back the semi down an alley with only inches to spare on each side, and he didn't make any of these maneuvers slowly. He was a speed demon. After all, he was on a tight schedule. One day, I remember asking my dad why the walls of the basement looked strange compared with the walls of our basement at home. Dad explained that when the building was first constructed, it didn't have a basement. In order to carve a basement out of underneath the big 3-story building, engineers had to carefully scoop dirt out of the crawl space under the building, slowly going deeper and deeper. The important thing was that they trussed up the foundation. They slowly exposed areas under the existing footings of the building and built a much lower foundation, a small section at a time. These new lower foundations became the outer walls of the basement and flared out as they got deeper. When the basement was finished, the outer walls were tapered, thicker at the bottom than at the top. Special racks for merchandise were built deeper at the top than at the bottom. Suddenly, I started feeling claustrophobic every time I went down into that basement. After explaining about the odd-looking walls, he said, "Denny, go over to the warehouse and have Tommy take you downstairs. You'll notice that building also has a carved-out basement." My dad's desk was in one far corner of the basement near the huge elevator that Ward's used to get things from floor to floor. One day he realized that it was possible to simultaneously open both the door to the basement and the elevator's door to the parking lot, which was about 8 feet higher. he finally found out a way to get some fresh air into that dark and dank place. I mentioned that by the time I was 10, my dad had started using my services to help him in the department. One of the jobs I had twice a year, a job that I hate to this day, was counting all the pieces of pipe connectors for a bi-yearly horrible but necessary chore called inventory. My dad hated that word. As a matter of fact, I remember several times when he came home from work, Mom would say, "Joe, don't tell me they've announced inventory." There was something on Dad's face that signaled the fact that he knew next week would be a tedious time. Back behind one of the walls was a long, thin room with racks on both sides. That room must have been no wider than 4 feet, but it was about 15 feet long. In those racks were every kind of elbow, extender, T, and angle pipe fitting, all of it made of that old galvanized pipe. After a day of counting, my hands and face were black from the protective grease that covered their threads. Every time I go into a hardware store today and happen to pass through the plumbing department, I stop for a second and look at the pipe fittings. I mentioned that my dad had a specific look on his face when he found out the next week was inventory. He also had another telltale expression. I only saw this one 3 times in my childhood. My mom knew this one also. If you've ever been to a department or home center store that has displays of toilets, you know that they're just ordinary toilets and bathtubs and lavatories placed in what is usually a cubicle bathroom setting. None of these items is hooked up either to the water or the sewer. Well, and as I say, I only remember 3 instances of this happening. Someone wanting to make a pit stop who had been told that the restrooms were in the basement. You guessed it. What my dad could never figure out was why anyone would think that a display toilet was the real thing. And stranger still, how they were able to take care of their business without anyone seeing them. You have to remember, though, that this was in the era long before surveillance cameras. When my dad came home after finding someone had used the wrong restroom, my mom could read it in his face. Speaking of toilets, there's one more thing about my dad and my childhood you need to know. When my dad died, I took possession of what others thought was an insignificant item in his belongings, a silver dollar. He once told me it had been given to him by an uncle. It was symbolic because it had been minted in the year of his birth. He kept it with him his entire life. How he kept from losing it, I'll never know. It was just kept in his pocket, along with other change. Over the years, the constant friction of the other coins in his pocket had scrubbed away everything on that old coin. By the time I got it, it was just a silver slug. Maybe that's why no one thought it had any value. But to me it did. You see, I have vivid memories of the way my dad used to use that coin in the old Montgomery Ward plumbing and heating department. Every so often a young couple would come down those old stairs wanting to purchase a toilet. If they looked around and didn't see any of them in their price range, the wife would signal to my dad. I realized over the years it was always the wife who would ask for assistance. You see, the wife would ask Dad, "Do you have anything else?" Reading between the lines, my dad realized what she was trying to say was, "Do you have anything cheaper?" I guess it would have been too humbling for the husband to have admitted that his family couldn't afford the price of even the cheapest of Dad's toilets. My dad would tell the couple to hold on while he looked for something. Going to the other side of the basement, he would find a basic white toilet, and since it was not attached to the floor, he would quietly pull it forward, exposing the very back of the bowl. took that silver dollar from his pocket and put it at a slant up against the white porcelain of the bowl. Then he used what looked like a karate chop, hitting the dollar and chipping off part of the surface of the toilet. Scoop up the broken shards of enamel and pottery, put them in his shirt pocket, and returned the silver dollar to his pants pocket. After standing up, he would signal the man and his wife to come where he was. "I think I found something near price range," he announced. I remembered when the guys in the warehouse unloaded this, they chipped the backside. Now, after you install this, you'll need a mirror to see the slight damage, and since the bowl's base is 4 inches thick, the slight loss of outer enamel won't hurt a bit. He went into a long tirade about how Tommy and the guys in the warehouse couldn't unload anything without damaging it. "By the way, what color is your bathroom?" Because of the fact that my dad had purposely nicked up a white toilet, no matter what the decor of the folks' bathroom back home, this slightly damaged toilet would fit right in. "How about half price?" he had asked the couple. I bet I saw my dad do that 24 times during the years I hung out in the basement. If that happened today, the main computer at Montgomery Ward in Chicago would generate a series of letters to my dad asking him why he was writing off so many damaged toilets and selling them at half price. The last time I got out Daddy's dollar to look at it, to make sure it was still where I had hidden it, I thought to myself that his actions had really taught me something. But I'm not sure whether the lesson he taught me was good or bad. Either he was teaching me that sometimes you have to bend the rules in order to help those among us who are not as fortunate, or he was teaching me that it's easy to cheat your employer. I like to think it was the first lesson. Somewhere out there in southern rural Indiana, there's several dozen toilets still working with part of the enamel missing on the far back side, all because of Daddy's dollar. Those events are more than a half a century in the past, but they still loom large in my memory. Yes, I still have my grandmother's old cookie jar, and inside it a picture of her smiling. I have the candle that burned on my mother's coffin. I have my dad's old army hat. All of those items are double boxed in a secure storage place. My dad's dollar is hidden away somewhere else. I haven't told anyone where it is. I'm sure that someday when I'm long gone, someone will find it and likely toss it out. After all, it's only a slug, a worthless old coin of no value. It's worthless. Is it?